At 93 years old, a wealthy elderly woman was abandoned by her children in a nursing home. They sold everything she owned and took over her company. But what they didn't expect was the vengeful plan she had prepared, a bombshell that would change everything forever. Lucia had always been a strong and independent woman, a matriarch who built her path through sacrifice and dedication. At 93, she hoped for nothing more than the affection of her children, Giovanni and Sofia, and the peace she deserved after a lifetime of struggles. However, on that fateful birthday, the reality awaiting her was a painful betrayal as devastating as it was unexpected. The promise of a surprise quickly turned into a nightmare when she was taken against her will to a nursing home. Lucia sat in the back seat of the car, watching the familiar landscape disappear rapidly through the window. It was the day of her 93rd birthday, but instead of celebrating with her children, she felt something strange in the air. Giovanni, at the wheel, wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes, while Sofia, sitting beside him, typed frantically on her phone. Lucia, who had always been an insightful woman, began to feel uneasy. "Where are we going?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's a surprise, Mama," Giovanni replied, not taking his eyes off the road. "You're going to love it." Lucia smiled, but the discomfort persisted. Something was wrong. Giovanni and Sofia rarely visited her, and today, on her birthday, they suddenly appeared with the promise of a surprise. In recent months, Lucia had sensed that something was changing. They had started talking more about her health, her advancing age, and often questioned her about her belongings and the house where she had lived for most of her life. She had always trusted her children blindly, raising Giovanni and Sofia with sacrifice alone after her husband's death. Now, however, the unease in her chest was growing. This surprise, how long will it take? Lucia tried once more, hoping to calm the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. "We're almost there," Sofia replied without looking up from her phone. A few minutes later, the car stopped in front of a large, austere building. Lucia frowned, trying to decipher what kind of place it was. When she saw the sign at the entrance, a chill ran down her spine. San Giovanni Residence for the Elderly. Her heart raced. "What are we doing here?" Giovanni turned off the car, walked around, and opened the door for Lucia. "Mama, you need specialized care. This will be the best place for you," he said with a voice too soft to be sincere. "What do you mean? Why did you bring me here?" Lucia struggled to understand what was happening, confusion starting to take over her mind. "I don't need this. I want to go home now." Sofia placed her hand on her mother's shoulder with a forced smile. "Mama, it's for your own good. You can't do everything by yourself anymore. You need help, and this is the best place for you." Lucia felt betrayed. It was as if the world was crumbling around her. She tried to get out of the car, but her legs trembled and her head spun. "Please take me home. I can't stay here." "You can't do this to me," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Giovanni and Sofia led her into the building, ignoring her protests. "It will be better this way, Mama. Here, you will have everything you need," Giovanni insisted as he gently pushed her inside the residence. Inside, a nurse with a cold smile greeted them and began to lead Lucia to what would be her new room. Each step she took was a struggle against the cruel reality forming around her. The hallway seemed endless, and the feeling of claustrophobia intensified with every passing second. When they finally arrived at the room, Lucia looked around, horrified. It was small, lifeless, with sterile white walls. Nothing there reminded her of home, of her life. She turned to Giovanni and Sofia, still standing in the doorway. "Please, I want to go back. Don't leave me here." Giovanni avoided her gaze, murmuring something about it being for the best. Sophia just waved goodbye quickly, without any real emotion. The door closed, and Lucia was left alone in the room, the pain of betrayal piercing her chest. "How could they do this to me?" she whispered to herself as tears continued to fall. The oppressive silence of the room seemed to echo the loneliness that was beginning to envelop her. Lucia's first days in the nursing home were a devastating experience. Each morning, she woke up hoping that all of this was just a nightmare, but the cruel reality imposed itself before her eyes. The sterile room, the silent corridors, and the impersonal distance of the staff made everything even more painful. There were no family photos, no memories, or any trace of her former life. She, who had always been active and in control, now found herself a prisoner of a cold, mechanical routine. The sporadic and superficial visits from Giovanni and Sophia hurt her even more. They showed up with trivial gifts like fruit or magazines, acting as if they were doing her a favor by visiting. It was as if the guilt they should feel was completely masked by a false sense of duty fulfilled. "We brought you fresh fruit, Mama," Giovanni said during one of his visits, placing the bag aside without even caring about the pain in his mother's eyes. Lucia looked at her children, trying to find some trace of the compassion she once believed existed in them. "When can I go home?" she asked with a fragile but determined voice. Sophia sighed and avoided Lucia's gaze. "Mama, we've talked about this. You need specialized care. You should get used to this place." Her tone was as cold as the expression on her face. With each visit, Lucia felt the weight of betrayal grow heavier. It was as if with every word, her children reinforced that she was no longer a part of their lives. They weren't there out of love. They were only there to maintain appearances, to rid themselves of any guilt. But the greater pain came in moments of silence, when the door to her room closed and she was left alone. The white walls suffocated her, constantly reminding her of the life that had been ripped away. She began to look at the clock on the wall, the monotonous ticking echoing in the empty room. Each second was a reminder that her freedom had been taken from her. Lucia remembered her home, every detail of the furniture she had lovingly chosen, the memories she had built there with her children when they were small, the image of them running through the garden, the Christmas nights, the laughter they shared. All of that now felt distant, like a dream fading with each second she spent in that place. One morning, while walking through the gardens of the nursing home, trying to escape the monotony of the imposed routine, Lucia spotted a small group of residents chatting animatedly under a tree. For a moment, she hesitated to approach, feeling out of place, but the loneliness was overwhelming. So, with slow steps, she walked toward the group. "Hello," Madame Lucia said. A friendly-looking gentleman named Enrico, noticing her approach, said, "We were talking about the good old days. Would you like to join us?" Lucia felt a slight wave of warmth at being included, a feeling she hadn't experienced since being taken to the home. "Of course, I'd love to," she replied, sitting down beside Enrico. As the other residents shared their stories, Lucia found herself immersed in memories of her own life. They talked about their pasts, their families, and the significant moments they had lived. Gradually, the conversations with the other residents began to offer her a bit of comfort, a breath of fresh air amid the constant pain of the betrayal she had suffered. Despite this small relief, the wound in her heart continued to grow. During the lonely nights, she couldn't escape thoughts of her home and the empire she had built with so much effort. Lucia was a strong woman who fought tooth and nail to ensure a dignified life for her children. And now she was reduced to just a patient in a nursing home, a shadow of what she once was. Her body was starting to feel the weight of all this anguish. With each passing day, the sense of fatigue intensified, and Lucia knew it was not just physical but mental and emotional. The simple act of walking to the garden or getting out of bed felt like a monumental task. One night, While lying in bed, listening to the heavy silence of the room, Lucia whispered to herself, "How could they do this to me?" Tears silently streamed down her face, but even amid the despair, there was a small flame still shining within her. A flame of justice, of revenge, of reclaiming what was hers. Days passed slowly and cruelly for Lucia, but amid the monotony of the nursing home, a presence began to soften her pain. Alice, a young nurse who seemed different from all the other staff. While the others treated Lucia with the coldness of a routine procedure, Alice displayed a genuine kindness that Lucia no longer expected to find in anyone. One afternoon, while Lucia was sitting in the garden, watching the other residents, Alice quietly approached and sat down beside her. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Lucia?" she asked with a sincere smile. Lucia, who had learned not to trust others' intentions, hesitated before responding. "I'm trying to adapt, but I think it's harder than I imagined." Her voice was a whisper of exhaustion, but there was a hint of desperation hidden behind her words. Alice looked at Lucia with compassionate eyes and gently touched her hand. "I know this must be very hard for you. Can't be easy to be forced to leave behind everything you know. But know that I'm here, and I want to help in any way I can." Lucia felt the tears sting her eyes, and for the first time since arriving at the home, she didn't feel completely alone. There was something in the way Alice spoke, the gentle tone and her genuinely concerned posture, that made Lucia lower her guard a little. "Thank you," she murmured, squeezing the young nurse's hand in gratitude. Seeing that Lucia was beginning to open up, Alice continued, "You don't have to go through this alone. Sometimes the people around us fail us, but that doesn't mean we should give up." Her words, full of empathy, resonated deeply with Lucia, as if she were speaking directly to her pain. I did so much for them," Lucia began, feeling the need to share, to vent to someone who, at least in that moment, seemed to truly listen. "I sacrificed everything so that Giovanni and Sofia could have a better life, and now they've discarded me as if I'm nothing." Alice was silent for a moment, allowing Lucia to express her hurt. "Often, those we love the most are the ones who disappoint us the most," Alice said in a gentle, encouraging voice. "But that doesn't mean you've lost your worth. You are still a strong and capable woman." Lucia wiped her tears, feeling more comfortable beside the nurse. There was something about this young woman that brought her a bit of peace, a sense that, despite everything, there was still kindness in the world. "I don't know what to do anymore," Lucia admitted, looking at the garden with a resigned expression. "It seems like they've taken everything from me. My home, my freedom, even my dignity." Alice, seeing the anguish in Lucia's eyes, squeezed her hand tighter. "You still have one very important thing, Mrs. Lucia. You have yourself. And as long as there is life, there is always a way to fight." These words awakened something in Lucia. After spending the last few days lost in pain and frustration, she began to see a small light at the end of the tunnel. Perhaps, after all, she was not completely defeated. Maybe, with time and the right strategy, she could find a way to turn her situation around. "Do you think there's still hope?" Lucia asked, looking into Alice's eyes, seeking confirmation. Alice smiled. "There is always hope, Mrs. Lucia. You just need to believe in it and, more importantly, take action. I'll be here to support you in whatever you need." Those words were like balm to Lucia's wounded heart. For the first time since being taken to the nursing home, she felt she was not alone. Alice was not just offering comfort. She seemed willing to be an ally, a friend. In the following days, Lucia and Alice continued to grow closer. While the routine of the nursing home remained impersonal and mechanical, the bond between the two grew in strength and trust. Alice became more and more a safe harbor for Lucia, offering advice, emotional support, and, above all, the feeling that perhaps there was still a way out. One afternoon, after yet another conversation with Alice, Lucia returned to her room with a newfound determination. Looking in the mirror, she wiped away the tears that had for so long been her only companions and, with a resolute look, said to herself, "I will fight. They will not defeat me." The atmosphere in the nursing home began to change for Lucia. Although the environment was still oppressive, and visits from Giovanni and Sofia remained sporadic and filled with falseness, the bond she had formed with Alice gave her the strength to face each day. However, the feeling that there was more behind her children's actions lingered like a persistent shadow over her mind. Then, one late afternoon, something unexpected happened. Antonio, Lucia's third son, appeared at the door of her room. He had always been the most sensitive and empathetic of her three children, but he had distanced himself from the family a few years earlier, unable to cope with his siblings' growing greed. His face was marked by guilt, and his eyes avoided meeting his mother's gaze, as if he knew he had also failed her. "Mama," Antonio began, his voice cracking with emotion, "I'm sorry for not coming sooner. I should have done something." Lucia, still shaken by the surprise of his visit, tried to smile. "Antonio, I thought you had forgotten me too." Her voice was soft but carried the weight of months of pain and abandonment. Antonio shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. "Never, Mama. I just didn't know how to deal with Giovanni and Sofia. They pushed me away from everything, even from you." He sat on the edge of Lucia's bed, holding her hand tightly. "I know they did terrible things, and I was weak for not protecting you." Lucia sighed deeply. "They took me from my home, Antonio. They put me here and started selling everything I built. They left me with nothing, as if I had no value anymore." Antonio's eyes filled with contained anger. "I suspected they were scheming, but I didn't know how far it would go." He took a deep breath, feeling the need to be honest with his mother. "Mama, Giovanni and Sofia are selling everything you own. And it's not just the house. They have taken complete control of the family business. I found out that they forged your signature to do it." Lucia felt the ground open up beneath her feet. She knew something was wrong, but Antonio's confirmation left her breathless. How could they do this? My own flesh and blood. How did Giovanni and Sofia get to this point? Antonio lowered his head, ashamed. "I don't know, Mama, but what I do know is that they're trying to take everything from you, and they won't stop until they succeed." He looked deeply into his mother's eyes, a spark of determination starting to emerge. "But I won't let that happen. Not anymore. I've been cowardly for too long." Lucia felt the pain of betrayal swell within her, but at the same time, a new strength began to rise. She held Antonio's hand tightly, as if grasping the only lifeline in a sea of despair. "Antonio, I know they've gone too far, but you're my only hope. I can't let them destroy everything I built with so much sacrifice." Antonio, now determined, nodded. "I will fight for you, Mama. I won't let Giovanni and Sofia continue with this horrible plan." He then looked around, as if checking to see if anyone could hear them. "But we need to be careful. They have power now, and they'll use any means to stop us." Lucia took a deep breath, feeling the anger and sadness transform into a flame of justice. "So what do we do now? How can we stop them?" Antonio knew the road ahead would be difficult, but his determination strengthened him. "I'll investigate everything. I've already gotten some documents, but I need more concrete evidence. Giovanni and Sofia are not invincible. They may have control now, but they did it illegally, and that will be their downfall." Lucia nodded. "And I will do what I can from here. Alice is the only person I trust in this place. She can help us." Antonio smiled slightly at hearing the young nurse's name. "Mama, If you trust her, then we'll need her help too. We'll need allies. Someone who can keep everything a secret. The following days became a game of patience and strategy. Antonio began making regular visits to Lucia, always secretly, avoiding any suspicion from Giovanni and Sofia. Alice, now aware of the entire situation, discreetly assisted, ensuring Lucia and Antonio had the time and privacy they needed to plan. Amid conversations in the garden and whispers exchanged in the room, Lucia and Antonio began to devise a plan. The key would be to expose Giovanni and Sofia for who they really were. Two con artists willing to destroy their own mother to gain more power and wealth. Lucia, although still hurt by her children's betrayal, now felt a new energy pulsing through her veins. She was no longer alone. With Antonio and Alice by her side, she had a chance to reclaim what had been taken from her and, above all, seek justice. Giovanni and Sofia thought they had one, but little did they know that the real battle was just beginning. The days following Antonio's revelation were filled with tension and caution. While Giovanni and Sofia continued their increasingly rare visits, Lucia and Antonio discreetly worked to gather evidence of the conspiracy. Alice, true to her promise to Lucia, played an essential role, ensuring that no one in the nursing home suspected the secret meetings between mother and son. The fight to unmask the siblings had barely begun, but it already carried a growing force. Antonio knew that confronting Giovanni and Sofia directly would be risky, so he decided the best approach was to continue investigating quietly, without raising suspicions. "Mama," he said, holding Lucia's hand during one of his visits, "I'm going to start reviewing the company's documents. We need something solid, evidence that incriminates them and reveals how much they've manipulated everything." Lucia, now carrying the weight of betrayal with a silent bitterness, nodded. "They've taken so much from me. I can't believe my own children would do something like this. But they've forgotten one important thing. I'm still alive. I can still fight." Antonio smiled, although his expression held concern. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Giovanni and Sofia were calculating and intelligent, but Antonio also knew that in their greed, they had made mistakes, and he was determined to find them. As Giovanni and Sofia manipulated the company and continued selling off Lucia's assets, Antonio went to the family office where he had once worked alongside his mother. The atmosphere he found there was completely different from what he remembered. The corridors, once full of life and camaraderie, now felt dark and cold. The expressions on the employees' faces were filled with fear and tension, as if something invisible was pressing down on them. "You know," Antonio said to an old colleague named Roberto when he ran into him in the halls, "things have changed a lot around here since Giovanni and Sofia took over. Half the staff has been fired and the new management, well, let's just say no one feels safe anymore." Antonio felt a rising anger as he listened to this, but he knew he needed to keep calm. "Roberto, I came here to try to understand what's going on. I need your help to uncover something about the changes Giovanni and Sofia have implemented." Roberto, who had trusted Antonio since the days when he worked alongside Lucia, nodded quickly. "I'll help you however I can. What are you looking for?" "Anything that links Giovanni and Sofia to fraud or embezzlement. They took control of the company illegally, and I need to prove it," Antonio explained. In the weeks that followed, Antonio and Roberto began to sift through the company's documents and transaction records, searching for any inconsistencies that could be used against Giovanni and Sofia. It didn't take long before something suspicious started to emerge. There were property sales made at absurdly low prices and signatures that, under Antonio's keen eye, clearly weren't Lucia's. This is it," Antonio exclaimed, holding a stack of documents with gross forgeries. "They used Mama's signature to sell the house for well below market value. And here," They diverted large sums of money into personal accounts. It's all right here. Roberto looked at the papers, shocked. They really did this to their own mother. Antonio shook his head, feeling a mix of anger and relief at finally having found the proof. Yes, and now we're going to expose everything. This is going to end. Meanwhile, in the nursing home, Lucia was beginning to notice a change within herself. Instead of letting the pain and betrayal consume her, she found strength in the small victories. Each time Alice entered the room to chat, and every word of support she received from Antonio reinforced her determination. She knew the final confrontation with Giovanni and Sofia was approaching, but she would no longer be a silent victim. One afternoon, while Antonio secretly reviewed the documents in the family office, Alice entered Lucia's room. "Mrs. Lucia, you seem more determined lately," Alice commented, helping the elderly woman sit in the chair by the window. "Something has changed, hasn't it?" Lucia, with a slight smile on her lips, looked at the nurse who had become her friend and confidant. "Yes, Alice, my son Antonio has discovered the truth. Giovanni and Sofia may think they've defeated me, but little do they know they're about to lose everything. We're going to expose them." Alice gently squeezed Lucia's hand. "You are a very strong woman, Mrs. Lucia. If you need me, I'll be here to help, just as I've always been." Lucia nodded, feeling gratitude grow inside her. "Thank you, Alice. You've been my guardian angel in this dark place. I don't know what I would do without you." Alice smiled, but before she could respond, Lucia felt a pang of emotion. "Antonio is almost ready to act. I just hope Giovanni and Sofia don't do something worse before everything comes to light." The weight of discovering Giovanni and Sofia's fraud was beginning to change Lucia's fate. With the evidence in hand, Antonio was determined to carry out the plan to unmask his siblings. But he knew he had to act cautiously. Giovanni and Sofia's greed had blinded them, and in their desperation to control everything, they didn't realize how much they were incriminating themselves. Lucia, for her part, was emotionally preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Alice remained by her side, being more than just a nurse. She was her ally, her friend, the only person in that place who truly cared about her well-being. "We're close, Mama," Antonio said during a secret visit to the nursing home. He brought with him a folder of documents that proved all the fraudulent transactions the siblings had carried out. "I've already spoken with a trusted lawyer. We'll take this to court, but before that, we need to publicly expose them." Lucia, although tired from the long emotional battle she was fighting, felt a new strength pulsing through her veins. "And how are we going to do this, Antonio?" "Giovanni and Sofia are preparing for a big celebration at the company. They're going to be honored for something I built with my own hands. I can't allow that to happen without everyone knowing who they really are." Antonio nodded, already knowing that his mother wouldn't back down. "The company has organized a big event to honor them. It will be the perfect opportunity to expose everything. We'll be there, and at the right moment we'll present the evidence. They won't be able to escape." As Antonio spoke, Lucia looked at Alice, who stood silently by her side, attentive but ready. "Alice, I'm going to need you by my side on that day. You have been my strength here, and I want you with me when all of this is over." Alice smiled, her eyes filled with determination. "I'll be with you, Mrs. Lucia. I've always been here, and I always will be." The days leading up to the event were filled with quiet preparations. Antonio and Roberto managed to organize all the necessary documents, while Alice took care to ensure Lucia was ready for the big moment. The nurse's support was crucial in helping Lucia keep her mind and body strong. It was as if every word of encouragement from Alice reignited the flame of justice burning within Lucia. Finally, the day of the event arrived. The company was luxuriously decorated, with important investors, market figures, and friends of the Marchetti family gathered in the main hall. Giovanni and Sofia moved confidently around the venue, receiving compliments and greetings for their supposed achievements. For them, everything was perfect. Nothing indicated that their world was about to come crashing down. Lucia, on the other hand, felt the weight of each step she took as Antonio and Alice helped her discreetly enter through the back of the hall. Aided by Sophie, a loyal employee of the family, Sophie, who had always been faithful to Lucia, offered to help ensure that Giovanni and Sofia were caught by surprise. "Come this way," Sophie said, leading them through a discreet corridor. "I'll make sure no one notices until the right moment." Lucia, with her body still fragile but her mind focused, held Antonio's hand as they moved forward. "I built all of this," she murmured as she passed through the corridors that had once meant so much to her, "and they destroyed it. But today, everything will be different." Antonio looked at his mother with pride. "Today, the truth will prevail, Mama." As Giovanni stepped onto the stage for his acceptance speech, Lucia and Antonio were ready. Alice remained by Lucia's side, ensuring everything was in order. "We are honored to be here tonight, celebrating our successes," Giovanni began, a smile overflowing with falsehood. "In recent years, Sofia and I have worked hard to secure the future of this company, and today we see the fruits of that effort." Lucia, watching from the entrance of the hall, felt a wave of anger and sadness wash over her. This was the height of hypocrisy. The company she had built with so much sacrifice was being celebrated in the hands of two con artists who hadn't hesitated to betray her. Antonio squeezed Lucia's hand. "It's now, Mama. Let's go." They walked through the hall toward the stage, and the room was suddenly filled with silence. All eyes turned to Lucia and Antonio as they slowly climbed the stairs to the stage. Giovanni and Sofia, who were about to receive recognition, froze at the sight of their mother standing there before everyone. "Sorry to interrupt," Antonio said, taking the microphone from Giovanni's hands, which seemed incapable of reacting. "But before this ceremony continues, there's something everyone needs to know." Giovanni tried to intervene, but his voice faltered. Sofia, next to him, looked even more flustered, unsure how to react to their mother's presence. Lucia, with her voice firm and clear, took the microphone and looked at the audience. "My children, Giovanni and Sofia, have betrayed me in every possible way. They forged my signature, sold my properties, and embezzled money. They took advantage of my trust and left me with nothing." Antonio began to show the documents he had prepared, projecting the evidence on a large screen for everyone to see. The forged signatures, the fraudulent sales, the illegal fund transfers, it was all there in plain sight. Giovanni and Sofia, unable to defend themselves, stood frozen, their faces pale. The hall, which moments before had been filled with applause and celebrations, was now filled with murmurs of shock and indignation. The silence in the hall was overwhelming. Lucia and Antonio's revelations had landed like a bombshell on everyone present. Giovanni and Sofia, paralyzed with fear and shame, were still trying to process what had just happened. The evidence projected on the screens, visible to all, was irrefutable. The forgeries, the embezzlement, the illegal sales, it was all exposed. The murmurs among the guests soon turned into looks of reproach and outrage. Family, friends, investors, and former colleagues were stunned, unable to believe that the heirs of the powerful Lucia Marchetti could be responsible for such betrayal. Lucia, feeling the weight of the revelation, took a deep breath. There was a mix of emotions within her: sadness, anger, but also relief. She had finally managed to expose the children who had robbed her of everything. "Giovanni and Sofia have betrayed not only me but all of you," Lucia said, her voice echoing through the hall. They used our family name, the company I built, to steal and enrich themselves at my expense. This needs to end now." Giovanni, who had been in shock until then, tried to react. "This is a farce," he shouted, but his voice trembled. "These accusations are false. They're trying to frame us." But it was too late. Antonio, holding the microphone firmly, replied calmly, "The evidence is here, Giovanni. There's no escaping the truth. You forged our mother's signature, sold her properties for ridiculous prices, and embezzled money from the company. All of this while she was vulnerable in a nursing home, unaware of what you were doing." Sophia, in desperation, tried to appeal to the audience. "Don't believe this. We only did what was necessary to take care of our mother. She was losing control and we needed to take charge." Lucia, with her eyes fixed on her children, shook her head. "You left me with nothing, and you still have the audacity to defend yourselves? I trusted you. I did everything for you." At that moment, Antonio's lawyer stepped onto the stage. "The evidence presented will be immediately taken to court. Giovanni and Sofia Marchetti will answer for their crimes, and all legal measures will be taken to ensure that Mrs. Lucia recovers what has been stolen from her." The hall erupted in murmurs again, this time with a clear note of support for Lucia. Investors were getting up, leaving the event, while some approached to offer words of solidarity. The image Giovanni and Sofia had carefully built over the years was in ruins. "I gave everything for you," Lucia continued, staring at her children. "And this is how you repay me, with deceit and betrayal. You do not deserve the name you carry, and you do not deserve what I built." Giovanni and Sofia, realizing there was no escape, began to lose control. Giovanni, now visibly shaken, tried to maintain his composure, but his voice faltered with every word. You always controlled us, always wanted us to do everything your way." Antonio interjected, his voice firm. "And it was that way that built everything we have, and more importantly, that kept us united as a family. But you chose greed over values, and now you will have to face the consequences." Meanwhile, security personnel approached to escort Giovanni and Sofia out. The siblings were in shock, unable to believe what was happening. They tried to resist, but the evidence was there, and the audience had no more doubts about who the real villains of this story were. Seeing Giovanni and Sofia being led away, Lucia felt a deep sense of relief but also immense sadness. These were her children. She had raised them, given everything to them, but they had chosen the path of betrayal. Antonio turned to his mother, holding her hand gently. "It's over, Mama. Finally, it's over." Lucia, still with a firm gaze, softly replied, "Not yet, my son. They still have much to pay for what they've done. But now we have a chance to rebuild what has been destroyed." In the following days, the consequences for Giovanni and Sofia were swift and devastating. The two were prosecuted for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. Their assets were seized, and they lost all control over the family business, which was returned to Lucia by court order. With Giovanni and Sofia out of the picture and the company back under her control, Lucia finally felt that a new chapter was beginning. The weight of her children's betrayal still lingered, but there was a deep relief in knowing that justice was being served. She no longer had to fight alone. Antonio was by her side, and with Alice's support, Lucia began to rebuild her life. The days that followed the confrontation were marked by significant changes in the company and in Lucia's own life. The company, once suffocated by the greed and mismanagement of Giovanni and Sofia, was beginning to thrive again under Antonio's leadership. He made decisions wisely, restoring the trust of employees and partners, many of whom had been marginalized by the former managers. Antonio, while relieved by the victory, knew there was still much work to be done. "Mama," he said one sunny afternoon while visiting Lucia in the nursing home garden. Things are improving. The company is stronger, and people are starting to believe in our family again. Lucia looked at her son with a soft smile. I knew you could do it, Antonio. I always knew you had the heart to lead. Now, with everything in your hands, I can finally rest, knowing that what we built is safe. She still lived in the nursing home, but now by her own choice. Lucia had made true friends there, and with Alice's support, she felt stronger and more secure than at any other time since Giovanni and Sofia had tried to destroy her. The small support network she had formed with other residents and staff made her feel connected, even after everything she had lost. Alice, as always, was nearby, bringing comfort and care to Lucia. She had become more than just a nurse. She was a confidant, a loyal friend, and Lucia treated her like part of the family. Alice, Lucia said one morning while having coffee with her, you are one of the reasons I managed to get through this storm. I don't know what I would do without you. Alice smiled, her eyes shining with warmth. Mrs. Lucia, I'm happy to know I could help, but the strength was within you all along. I just gave you a little push. In the corridors of the nursing home, Lucia began to be seen differently. Once she was a defeated woman, left behind by the children she loved so much. Now, she was a figure of resilience, someone who, despite all the adversities, had found her way back to dignity and justice. At the company, Antonio implemented the changes his mother had always wanted but that Giovanni and Sofia had ignored. He rehired employees who had been unjustly fired and revamped policies to ensure the company became a place of collaboration and respect again. The finances, which had been compromised by his siblings' misdeeds, were gradually recovering, and the name of the Marchetti family, once tarnished, was beginning to be restored. However, the legacy of Giovanni and Sofia still lingered in the air. Although they had been convicted, their actions left deep scars on the family and the company. For Lucia, the emotional wound of being betrayed by her own children would never fully disappear. But with Antonio by her side, she found a new purpose: to help rebuild what had been destroyed, even if indirectly. One day, while Antonio was talking to the company's new investors, he mentioned something he had been considering for a while. Mama, he said in a private conversation, you've done so much for all of us. I think it's time for you to think about yourself, about how you want to spend the next few years. Lucia looked at him, surprised. What do you mean, Antonio? You've always worked tirelessly to ensure our family had everything, and I know it has cost you a lot. Maybe it's time to think about how you want to live from now on. Perhaps do something just for you. Lucia fell silent for a moment. The idea of living for herself was something she hadn't considered in a long time. Throughout her life, she had dedicated herself to her children, the business, and building a legacy. Now, with life reorganizing around her, maybe it was time to finally allow herself to think about herself. You're right, she admitted with a melancholic smile. Maybe I can finally do something for myself. Travel, explore new horizons, live a simpler life. Antonio smiled, happy to see his mother beginning to think about something beyond the responsibilities she had always carried. You deserve it, Mama. And if you need anything, I'll always be here. Lucia, who had been a dedicated businesswoman, was now allowing herself to dream again. But this time about something much more personal. Alice, who always accompanied her during these moments of reflection, couldn't help but notice the change in her friend. Mrs. Lucia, you seem different lately, as if something has changed inside you. Lucia smiled, looking up at the blue sky above. Alice, I think you're right. I spent so many years fighting, worrying about the future, that I forgot what it's like to live in the present. Now, for the first time, I feel like I can do that. Alice nodded, pleased. And what do you plan to do with this new phase, Mrs. Lucia? Lucia paused, as if reflecting on all the possibilities now opening up before her. I thought about traveling. I've always wanted to see the world, beyond business, beyond responsibilities. Maybe this is the right time for that. Do you have a specific place in mind? Alice asked, curious. I've always wanted to visit the small villages in Italy where my grandparents came from. I also thought about visiting southern Spain to see the landscapes that I only know through books. And who knows? Maybe discover new places I never imagined visiting. Alice smiled widely. That sounds wonderful, and I'm sure it will be a transformative experience. It was then that Lucia made an important decision. It wouldn't be just any trip. It would be a journey of rediscovery, reconnecting with her roots and seeking new horizons. Life had given her a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of it. In the following days, Lucia began to plan her trip with the help of Antonio and Alice. Although she still lived in the nursing home, now by her own choice, Lucia knew she was capable of taking the reins of her life once again. She wanted to start with something special, a visit to the place where her family had begun, a picturesque village in Italy where her grandparents had been born. I think it will be a way to honor my history, my family, going back to my roots but also moving forward with something new. Lucia told Antonio as they discussed the details of the trip. Antonio, always supportive, agreed. You deserve this, Mama. More than ever, you deserve to live for yourself, without the worries that have always surrounded you. Alice, who was nearby, smiled upon hearing their conversation. And don't worry, Mrs. Lucia. I'll be by your side every step of the way on this journey. Lucia looked at Alice, grateful to have found someone who not only cared for her but had also become a true friend. I couldn't ask for better company for this new phase of my life. As the preparations continued, Lucia began to quietly say goodbye to the past that had been marked by so many struggles. She still met occasionally with other residents of the nursing home, and their conversations often revolved around memories and life stories. But unlike before, Lucia no longer felt imprisoned by those memories. She had decided to live in the present and, above all, for herself. The day of departure finally arrived. Lucia, Antonio, and Alice were at the airport, ready to embark on the first leg of their journey. Antonio, although he wouldn't accompany his mother on this trip, was there to ensure that everything went smoothly. He looked at Lucia with pride in his eyes. Mama, I'm sure this trip will be the renewal you deserve, he said while holding his mother's hands. Lucia, with a serene smile, replied, And you, Antonio, are ready to take care of the company and carry on our family legacy. I know I'm leaving it in good hands. Antonio nodded, his voice full of determination. I promise I will honor everything you built, Mama. You taught me to fight with integrity, and that's what I'll do. With a tight hug, Lucia and Antonio said goodbye. Alice, by Lucia's side, waited for the boarding call. So, ready for the adventure? Alice asked, excitement sparkling in her eyes. Lucia took a deep breath and, for the first time in many years, felt completely free. More than ready, Alice. I'm ready to live. With that, they boarded the plane, leaving behind a life marked by ups and downs, but carrying with them the certainty that the future was finally in their hands. Lucia didn't know exactly what she would find on this journey, but for the first time, that didn't matter. She was willing to discover and, above all, to live fully the time she had left. And so, with a light heart and a renewed spirit, Lucia embarked on her new adventure. A journey that symbolized not just a fresh start but proof that even after the greatest betrayals, life could surprise us with new opportunities for happiness. Lucia and Alice landed in Italy under the clear sky of a sunny morning. The air had a freshness that seemed to blow new breezes over Lucia's life, making her feel lighter with every step. The small village, with its stone streets, historic buildings, and the soft sound of conversations in the distance, was a place Lucia had always dreamed of visiting. And now, with Alice by her side, she was finally there, ready to reconnect with her roots and, at the same time, discover a new version of herself. As they walked through the village streets, Lucia felt as if she were stepping back in time, as if she were walking through her family's memories. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about this place," Lucia said with a nostalgic smile. "She said that here, people knew the true meaning of community and family." Alice, absorbing the surroundings, could feel how much this trip meant to Lucia. "I think she would be proud to see you here, Mrs. Lucia. She certainly knew that one day you would return to this place." Lucia nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. "I feel more connected to her now than ever. And with that, I feel like I can finally allow myself something I never did, to be happy without worries." The days in Italy were a rediscovery experience for Lucia. She allowed herself to explore the village at a leisurely pace, visiting local markets, talking to the residents, and, most importantly, absorbing every moment with an open and serene heart. Alice, always by her side, was a constant and fun companion, helping Lucia live this new phase lightly and without pressure. On a particularly sunny afternoon, while having coffee in a small square, Alice asked, "Mrs. Lucia, now that you've returned to your roots, what comes next? What do you hope for this new phase of your life?" Lucia paused, observing the activity around her. Families strolling, children running, life happening all around her. "Alice, I think for the first time in a long time, I don't have a rigid plan. And that is liberating. I used to plan every detail of my life, every step of my way. But now I want to see where life takes me." Alice smiled. "That sounds like true freedom," Lucia agreed. "Yes, and I think that's exactly what I've always been looking for without realizing it. Life has tested me in many ways, took a lot from me, but it also gave me opportunities to rebuild. And that's what I want to do. Not just survive, but truly live." As the days turned into weeks, Lucia began to realize that this journey was not just a visit to her origins, but also a closing of a chapter. The place that once represented the beginning of her family's story was now helping her to close a chapter marked by struggles and open a new, softer, and more meaningful one. On a calm night, while Lucia and Alice walked through the hills surrounding the village under a starry sky, Lucia felt a deep peace. The weight of Giovanni and Sophia's betrayal, although still present in her memories, no longer dominated her mind. Instead, she focused on the beauty of the simplicity around her. The small joys, the heartfelt conversations, and the new connections she was making. "You seem more at peace," Alice observed, breaking the night's silence. Lucia smiled gently, looking at the sky. "I am. For a long time, I carried the burden of disappointment and betrayal. Giovanni and Sophia, they made terrible choices. But I can't let that continue to define me. I've learned that, despite what happened to me, I can still choose how to live. And I choose to live in peace." Alice, always sensitive to Lucia's emotions, stopped and looked at her. "You're an inspiration, Mrs. Lucia. I never thought someone could go through everything you've been through and still emerge so strong and determined." Lucia, touched by her friend's words, held her hand in gratitude. "I had help, Alice. Without you, Antonio, and all the people who supported me, I wouldn't have made it. Sometimes what we need most is someone to remind us of our worth. And you all did that for me." At the end of her journey in Italy, Lucia was no longer the same woman who had arrived. She felt renewed, invigorated, ready to live each day with gratitude and fullness. When it was time to return home, Lucia felt she was leaving nothing behind, only taking with her the certainty that even after the greatest storms, there's always room for a fresh start. On the flight back, Alice, with a sparkle in her eyes, asked, "So, what will be the next adventure, Mrs. Lucia?" Lucia laughed, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I don't know yet, Alice, but that's the most exciting part. Life has surprised me in so many ways. I think I'm ready for whatever comes next." Back in her daily life, Lucia didn't return to the nursing home with the same sense of confinement she had felt before. Now, that place was just another starting point for new adventures. She had friends there, a dedicated son, and a loyal friend by her side. But above all, Lucia had herself. And in the end, that was the most important thing. Lucia, the woman who had been betrayed and abandoned, was now the woman who had triumphed over adversity and rediscovered her own strength. And amidst all the uncertainties of life, she knew there would always be something new to discover, something new to conquer.